Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
President Trump heading over to Scotland. A headline breaking on the Bloomberg terminal last hour that he's going to meet with the EU's Ursula von der Leyen to continue trade talks. But another big focus, and definitely the focus of yesterday, was President Trump's recent comments about the Fed chair, Jerome Powell. And he was asked about his visit to the Fed's renovation site yesterday as he headed out on his trip. We want to bring you part of what he said earlier.
We had a very good meeting. Forgetting about the building, that's out of control and all that. But I think we had a very good meeting on interest rates. And he said to me, now I don't know if he's going to say this on Thursday or whenever he speaks, but he said to me very strongly, the country is doing well. He said, congratulations, the country is doing really well. And I got that to mean that I think he's going to start recommending lower rates.
Hot out there today in the nation's capital. It's 90-something degrees right now. It's supposed to feel like 107 later, so maybe his timing was right, as opposed to those going to Fenway Park this weekend. That ought to be something. Although I guess they're making some concessions to make that work. Tyler Kendall. The president said one thing yesterday. By the way, we're going to be talking about this with Lael Brainard in a moment, and I can't wait to hear her thoughts on this, having written an op-ed in the Washington Post about this very matter. Wendy Benjaminson, the president yesterday, said, I think he's going to start recommending lower rates because of that conversation. That is a continuation of the pressure campaign.
It absolutely is a continuation of the pressure, just when we thought after that meeting that the pressure had eased up a bit, right? Because he toured the construction site, which is something former developer Donald Trump loves to do. He put on a hard hat, he walked through the construction site, and he seemed to deem it under control. Yeah. Slapped Powell on the back, made a joke about interest rates. Powell stunningly fact-checked him publicly in real time, seemed to have gotten away with it. And markets reacted positively to that whole scene, thinking, well, now Powell has his job. Now, this morning's comments could mean that Trump still feels very confident that now Powell sees things the way he does. But come Thursday, if those interest rates don't come down, I think he'll be back to being what Donald Trump calls a numbskull and too late and a disappointment and all that. And this nice little bromance that brewed up yesterday will be over again.
Well, let's look at this broader picture, because we have a great story on the Bloomberg terminal this morning that I know that you edited, Wendy, about this idea of how Trump's strategy when it comes to pressuring the Fed is about flooding the zone. Exactly. Can you talk to us what led to us to this point? Because this originally started with the administration, right, pointing to economic data, for example. And now we've taken a turn and there's this highlight on the Fed's recent renovations.
Right. And Nancy Cook wrote this brilliant story about this. And it is one of Trump's absolute techniques that he uses for a lot of different things. We see it with him trying to distract people from the Jeffrey Epstein story. What he does is something called Steve Bannon coined flooding the zone. Mm-hmm. So Powell, isn't lowering interest rates. The Fed is renovating its building. This is wrong. He's a bad person. He just attacks from so many angles that it's impossible for the target to respond to one thing because another thing pops up over here and something else pops up over there. And that's what this renovation scandal, and I'm doing air quotes, was all about, because there was no scandal. It's a building built in the 1930s. It was filled with asbestos and lead. It hadn't been renovated since the 1930s. Yeah. And, it needed a little touch up. And I do think Trump sort of got that when he walked through yesterday.
He didn't find Versailles.
He didn't find
Versailles. I guess when he got there, as Russ Vought suggested. So again, is this simply about pressuring Powell to cut rates, or does Donald Trump want him to resign? He says it's not a fireable offense. But if you make life miserable enough for someone, and I know that Jay Powell has said he's going nowhere, is that the aim here?
Right. I think he really wants the interest rates down. I don't think he cares. Okay. I mean, he appointed Jay Powell in the first place. Yes, he did. And so at some point they saw eye to eye on things, enough for him to become the Fed chairman. And I think if Powell were to do that, then everything would be fine. If he doesn't, I also think Trump knows the blowback, not only politically but from the markets, of firing a Fed chair would be so severe that he's just going to keep needling Powell and needling him probably until his term is up in May 2026, because Powell is showing a great deal of confidence.
Yeah.
He doesn't need this job, right? And so he's showing a great deal of confidence and saying, this is what I think. Fire me if you will, but this is what I think is right for the economy, which the Fed chair gets to do in our country. So,
that's the way it works.
Yeah.
All right.
Exactly.
A lot to watch for here. Wendy Benjaminson, senior editor at Bloomberg, we thank you so
Wendy.
much. And to continue this conversation, we want to bring in Lael Brainard, former director of the National Economic Council under the Biden administration, former vice chair of the Federal Reserve, now distinguished fellow at the Georgetown Center for Financial Markets and Policies. Lael, thank you so much for joining Bloomberg. I just want to pick up on this conversation. President Trump says he's not going to fire Jerome Powell. So is this just all about trying to see lower rates next week when the FOMC meets?
There's probably a few things that are going on. One, I think it is an effort to pressure the Federal Reserve for lower rates. It's also a distraction. That was a picture for the ages yesterday. The president standing next to the chairman of the Federal Reserve wearing hard hats. Quite a story. And it also serves to find a place to have blame to the extent that the economy is not as strong as the president has said that it would be at this juncture. You heard him say that the Federal Reserve should be lowering rates, and that's the only thing standing in the way. So I think it does serve multiple purposes in terms of the storyline. But we also know that Federal Reserve chairs go down in history for actually following their mandate and not caving to political pressure. And those that do cave to political pressures tend not to be viewed very favorably in the history books.
Lael, it's great to have you with us. I want to ask you about the op-ed that you wrote recently in the Washington Post, an opinion piece with the headline, "The Real Reason Trump Wants to Fire the Fed Chair." You say it has everything to do with debt management. The president, you write, wants to reduce the debt service on the trillions his mega bill will add to the national debt. So now we're connecting the dots to the president's big, beautiful bill. The fact is, and you say this in your piece, they are saying it out loud. Lael Peter Navarro sat right at this desk a couple of days ago and talked about the need to lower interest rates in an effort to save $1 trillion when it comes to our debt. Is this the new mission creep? We hear a lot about mission creep in the central bank. Is this a version of that in your eyes?
Well, certainly this is the kind of diversion of the Federal Reserve from its core inflation fighting mission to supporting the administration's desire to finance this big new increase in the national debt cheaply. That is traditionally the way that central banks in other countries like Brazil or Turkey, Argentina, go awry and lose that credibility on inflation fighting. So I have to say that I was surprised to hear the president say it out loud when he says every percentage point reduction in interest rates translates into $300 billion. What he's talking about is interest payments on the national debt. And when he says, if the Fed will cut by 3 percentage points down to 1 percentage point, that'll save us $1 trillion in debt service. That's what he's really referring to. And he said it quite explicitly. And economists have a term for it because it has happened so many times in history. It's called fiscal dominance, when debt management becomes more important for the central bank than fighting inflation. And what happens is you lose control of inflation, and ultimately long-term interest rates actually go up.
Well, we did actually get a different sort of answer when we posed this question to Joe Livornia, senior counselor to the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, about concerns when it comes to the long end of the yield curve. He joined us on Balance of Power last week. I want to play you some of his reaction and then get your reaction on the other side.
I don't see how markets are going to be worried about that. In fact, if you look at where yields are. They're lower than where they started the year. And when a lot of the people who are worried about the market selling off because of credibility and things of that sort, these are many of the same folks who back in April said the U.S. was uninvestable. And yet we had Treasury data that came out today that showed essentially record inflow into the market with Treasury demand virtually at an all-time high. So these arguments, I don't think, hold up to really scrutiny into the facts.
We should say that response was last week on July 17th. But Lael, I'm wondering what you make of that defense when it comes to this issue.
Well, what we did see when the markets were really reacting to news that this administration would really pressure the Federal Reserve and might fire the chair of the Federal Reserve back in April. That was the first time I think market participants really were digesting that news, and there was a lot of repositioning, as you'll recall. And what we saw is that the long end of the curve did actually go up quite a bit, and the dollar weakened. That is the kind of response that you tend to see in circumstances where central banks lose credibility on the fight against inflation because investors demand more compensation to hold longer-term securities, sovereign securities, treasury securities, if they think that the currency is going to be weaker and inflation is going to go up. So that is just the traditional kind of market reaction. We have seen it. We certainly saw it back in April. Now, I believe markets have seen the president back down, say that he's not going to fire the Federal Reserve chair. Yesterday, he was even somewhat complimentary. And I think that's why you're not seeing those kinds of reactions right now in markets. But I do think the reaction we saw in April was a cautionary tale.
It did seem the president came fixing for a bit of a fight yesterday. Lael, I'm sure you were watching as the two wore hard hats. The president pulled a piece of paper out of his suit jacket to prove to the Fed chair that not only was the renovation at the Eccles building running over in terms of money, but more than he thought, and he added a whole new building to the list. Let's bring everybody back to the construction site. Watch and listen.
It looks like it's about 3.1 billion. It went up a little bit, or a lot. So the 2.7 is now 3.1.
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, it just came out.
Yeah, I haven't heard that from anybody at the Fed. You're including the Martin renovation. You just added in a third building is what that is. That's a third building.
Well, no, but it's a building that's being built.
No, it was built 5 years ago.
Well, I'd love him to lower interest rates. But other than that, what can I tell you?
Complete with a knock on the back there. Lael, I'm wondering, as you watched this and had a chance to digest everything that happened yesterday, does this go down as a good day for Fed independence?
Look, I think what was interesting is that the Federal Reserve had a chance to explain what was going on with their renovations. These are very old buildings. They have two buildings that really haven't been renovated, I think, since the 1930s, and one that just was renovated for the first time since the 1970s. And I thought what was interesting is that the president really came out of those discussions, really showing his long experience as a real estate developer. He talked about how hard it is to build on a former swamp and the kind of very expensive renovations that are necessary to really be secure in pushing down when there are concerns about the water table. So in a way, it was interesting to see the president getting into the complexities of the renovation. In that sense, yes, I think it was a good day just for transparency around the Federal Reserve, which is so important because the Federal Reserve has to be accountable to the public.
Well, I do want to go back to this idea of so-called mission creep that Joe had mentioned earlier. We've heard this critique from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, from Kevin Warsh, who we know is potentially in the running to be the next Fed chair. Do you think that it would be healthy for the Fed to conduct a review of its non-monetary policy activities? Is that something that you think would actually be a good thing for the Fed to look into, whether or not that's an external review, for example?
So I always think that the Federal Reserve benefits from being accountable and transparent to the public and particularly to Congress. I mean, it's really Congress who has oversight of the Federal Reserve, who wrote the Federal Reserve Act that governs the monetary policy and the Dodd-Frank Act that governs their responsibilities in financial stability policy. So I do think those kinds of reviews are very beneficial. And there are many mechanisms that the Federal Reserve could use to undertake such a review. The thing that would concern me, I have heard the Secretary of the Treasury saying that the administration would undertake a review, and that does raise some concerns.
Lael,
in the
I'm sorry
context
we're out
where
of time.
Sorry.
We'd love to have you come back to finish this conversation. It's wonderful to have you back on Balance of Power. Former Director, National Economic Council, former Vice Chair of the Federal Reserve, Lael Brainard, with us live from Washington, only here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Right now, we're waiting for President Trump to touch down in Scotland. He's heading overseas, and lawmakers in Washington are actually heading home for their August recess, where, Joe, they're going to have to answer to their constituents when it comes to perhaps the big achievement from the last few weeks, the big, beautiful bill, and a lot of other things that have happened recently in Congress. And one of the things we're watching for, though, new polling out, showing that despite perhaps unpopularity with that bill, President Trump's popularity has actually maintained course.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not just the bill. It's the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. It's the stuff we've been talking about regarding trade, the uncertainty over tariffs. And look at this, unchanged really since April. Slightly underwater when you consider 46%, but not bad with all of the headlines that we've been looking at. Disapprove at 52%, Tyler, and you could potentially have a much different situation for Republican lawmakers, to your point, when they get home for August recess and getting an earful at town hall meetings that are about to begin.
And it was such a good point about the tariffs, too, because we have to keep in mind that President Trump really ran on his handling of the economy. Poll after poll leading up to the election kept telling us that that was really where he was significantly ahead, and that ultimately helped him clinch it. So amid so much uncertainty, as we're still waiting ahead of that August 1st deadline for some more tariff deals, these numbers are pretty remarkable.
Well, true. There is actually something really interesting that pops out of this poll. It's really important to go beyond the headline numbers sometimes. The fact of the matter is 47% in the survey rate the economy as excellent or good. That is a significant increase, an 11-point jump from April, and by far the highlight in this poll for Donald Trump. We're going to talk about this and what lawmakers are going to experience in the weeks ahead here now that recess has begun with our political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us. Rick is, of course, our Republican strategist and partner at Stone Court Capital. Jeannie is Senior Democracy Fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Rick, what's your thought here on how you rationalize these approval ratings? We talked about some different numbers from Ipsos yesterday against some of the vitriol that lawmakers are expecting to hear when they get home.
Yeah, obviously, Joe, the point you make about the big jump in the approval of the economy is the standout number here, right? That's what's driving the sustainability of the Donald Trump approval rating. And it's different than any other poll I've seen, including the Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index for the month, which I, of course, have to bring up. Which actually is noticeably more depressing in the consumer attitudes than this poll would indicate. That being said, what's also really interesting is it's not arguable that the reconciliation bill is wildly unpopular. Most polls, including this one, give it approval at negative 60%. Immigration, even in this poll, has gone down in popularity for Donald Trump. And tariffs are wildly unpopular. So even though the three signature issues that have defined his presidency in the first 6 months are underwater with the electorate, he has sustained relative stability in his job approval rating.
Well, to that point, let's talk about the power of the base, Jeannie. This poll finds that 88% of GOP voters approve of President Trump's performance, with 66% strongly approving. With numbers like these, what kind of signal does that give to Republicans ahead of the midterms? Do they have to expand the base here when you have such a high number, 88% overall approving of his performance?
They do. It's a very strong number, and I've seen it in other polls on the base as high as 90+%. So he is doing very well in his base, despite their frustration with or concerns about the Epstein issue and some of the issues that Rick just talked about, including his signature issue of immigration, where his poll numbers with his base have gone down. I do think what this means is that they're going to have to focus on the midterm and shore up that base and make sure they can get them out to vote. And one thing we know is it's a lot easier to get people out to vote when they're angry rather than when they're satisfied. I will give Donald Trump credit for this. He has done already 6 months in a lot more work towards the midterm than I think most presidents do, and much more than he focused on it in the first term. I mean, he is really focused like a laser beam on this midterm election. So Democrats who think they can sort of run on a history where the other party will do worse, they have their work cut out for them, but they have some things going for them, including this dislike of everything he's done on the big, beautiful bill, the tariffs, and immigration, 3 signature issues.
I suspect we'll hear the name Jeffrey Epstein at most all of these town hall meetings. 76% of voters in this new poll in the Wall Street Journal. By the way, that includes 64% of Republicans say they believe the Justice Department is hiding important information when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein. Rick, they're going to be Democratic trackers at all of these town halls, right? If you're a Republican lawmaker, how do you manage this?
Yeah, I think you're going to see a slew of viral videos coming out of town halls over the course of the next couple of weeks for these House members doing so, indicating a lot of anger and frustration over their inability to make public the documents they promised they would do related to the Jeffrey Epstein case. And everyone already is on defense in Washington, right? This thing has turned into a mess. But Democrats are taking advantage of it, as well they should. And there's trackers are going to be in all these swing districts. And there's, as Ricky Ricardo used to say, there's lots of splaining to do, to these constituents who are wondering, hey, you promised to get this done and you haven't done it yet. So Republicans are going to have to be pretty agile on how they manage this situation at home.
Well, is that the strategy then for Democrats on the other side, Jeannie? Because yes, we have some of these pretty good talking points when it comes to Epstein and how unpopular we know the big, beautiful bill is. But we already are hearing from Republicans starting to message around the idea of a government shutdown in the fall when they get back in. Talk about the potency here of all these different threads that Democrats have the ability to pull on, but they're also up against that pretty hard messaging from the GOP.
They absolutely are, Tyler. I mean, the issue of the shutdown, we're going to really see how agile the Democrats can be. I think there is a message there for them to say that the administration, Republicans, are not willing to cross the aisle and deal with them in a fair, bipartisan manner. But it's not an easy message to make. They are starting to get out there more on the Epstein issue. I saw recently, when I was venturing through TikTok, some video of Ron DeSantis fending off some of the people talking about the Epstein case. We're going to see a lot more of that, to Rick's point. Also, we are seeing billboards around the country already talking about the big, beautiful bill and labeling the shutdown, particularly in rural communities of these hospitals and medical centers, as Trump's doing, the Republicans doing. So Democrats will try to run against the big, beautiful bill on repeal, on holding Republicans rather to the fire on Epstein, and they're going to have to watch their back on the shutdown message. So it's going to be a fun midterm, to say the least, Tyler. We're going to have a lot of fun.
And it starts now, Jeannie. And, when you talk about Jeffrey Epstein, you have to mention a half dozen other stories that the White House has thrown up in the air to get us talking about other stuff. Look no further than this headline, with the Senate Judiciary Republicans John Cornyn and Lindsey Graham now calling on the Attorney General to appoint a special counsel to investigate President Barack Obama, his staff, members of his administration. The president saying in the driveway today that the Supreme Court ruling on presidential immunity probably means that Obama's going to be fine. Everybody else, not so much. Is this the kind of overreach Democrats are hoping for?
Absolutely. This puts the Republicans in a difficult situation. They don't much like special counsels, as we can remember. And when Laura Loomer was calling for one in the Epstein case, they shied away from that. So, yeah, they're going to have a difficult time then calling for just certain special counsels and not others, and getting over their dislike of special counsels to begin with. So, and by the way, Donald Trump is right. He is protected as well as Barack Obama when it comes to immunity.
Well, Rick, just in our final couple minutes here, I'd love your perspective on this too. Is this going to be too far of a push when it comes for Republicans? Could this backfire?
Yeah, I really don't get it. We're kind of all falling into this, sort of conspiracy theory trap. And that stuff's great, sitting around the fire in the winter when you got nothing else to do but drink whiskey and talk about, conspiracy theories. But arguably the polling we were just talking about indicates that Donald Trump's got a little bit of wind at his back. Assuming he can get these tariffs done, immigration is now down to 0 on the border, and the economy seems to be starting to percolate along. I mean, certainly a record day on the markets today. Why in the world would you distract anybody from that message set? I mean, it's like the administration is going out of their way to distract people from what's really important to them. These conspiracy theories are only important to the core base of the MAGA movement that are going to do nothing but vote for Donald Trump, no matter how many times he runs for president. And so, there is indications that independents are starting to get a little fed up with this stuff, and they've got to focus on those guys if they want to have a Republican Congress in 2027.
Wow. We've just got a minute left here, Jeannie, as you consider the options ahead here for President Trump. He's going to be meeting with the Europeans on Sunday. To Rick's point, if he can land a deal with the EU, does that approval rating get back above water, over 50, in his first year in office?
I don't know if the EU will be enough, but it's certainly a step in the right direction. I think China is going to be critically important. And Joe, I can't get over Rick's talking about winter fires and whiskey. So I'm having a hard time answering your question as I think about these days and Rick around the fire. But yeah, it would help, but I don't think it'll change it completely.
All right, our political panel today, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, both Bloomberg Politics contributors.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Charlie, I don't know. I was thinking we were going to meet for the Dodgers game this weekend. That's going to be hot. It's 100 and something degrees in Boston today. At least, it feels like 100 something degrees. They call it the best bar in Boston, Charlie, Fenway Park. I don't know how you do it without the taps on.
Without a doubt. We'll see you there. Big Green Monster, you're buying.
Okay, that's a deal.
If we can get a
He's
beer,
live from New York.
Exactly.
Well done. See, I know Charlie knows Boston. If you're with us on 92.9, we see you and feel you, and maybe we'll smell you later after a weekend, I guess, without concessions workers at Fenway Park. The Aramark folks have gone on strike as everybody heads home here. They say D.C., we just saw this yesterday, we've got the worst traffic in the country now, topping Los Angeles. How's that for a superlative? The worst traffic in the nation, dethroning L.A. for its famous congestion. This is according to a Consumer Affairs ranking. The average daily commute is the longest in the United States at over 33 minutes. And by the way, most people I know around here are doing well over an hour. And you can thank everybody coming back to the office, private sector organizations following the feds to get everybody back to work. But this weekend and for the next month, not so much, as House lawmakers head home with a whole schedule full of town halls waiting for them, fundraisers and so forth. And they're going to be talking about the big, beautiful bill. Unless, of course, George Santos, you're going to prison today. I don't know if you heard about this, but it's real. The curtain falls, the spotlight dims. and the rhinestones are packed. Yeah, there it is. Good job, Cece. George Santos on X saying, "Good night, Irene." He reports to prison today to begin a 7-year sentence. Did a whole bunch of interviews on the way out. I'm guessing it won't be too long before the jailhouse interview takes place. Lisa Camuso Miller has probably known a couple of lawmakers who took that path, but that's not why she's here tonight. The former RNC communications director, Republican strategist, and host of the Friday Reporter podcast is with us right now to sort of get a sense of what is waiting for lawmakers in the month of August. Lisa, it's great to see you. I hope you're ready for the rest of this summer, because this is when it gets real in Washington, right? Lawmakers are going to start holding town halls, and they have got a pretty tough argument to make, according to the polling we saw this morning in the Wall Street Journal. Forget Donald Trump's approval rating right now. Look at the polling on the approval for the big, beautiful bill. 42% think it's a good thing. 52%, a majority of Americans, disapprove. This is the Wall Street Journal once again. There you can see it on screen if you're with us on YouTube. Lisa, how do you sell that message in a town hall in the weeks ahead?
Joe, I think each and every one of these members that's going home is probably Republican or Democrat. It's a bipartisan, difficult time to talk about these issues, because the big, beautiful bill, as they're calling it, was supposed to really answer some of those concerns that voters had when they went to the polls last November. And now it's not just a game of getting the work done. It's a messaging game. It's become a back and forth. There's been some question about what will happen to rural hospitals. There's been some question about what will happen to access to care, access to resources. And so I think that this is going to be a really big challenge, not only for Republicans who supported and enacted this legislation, but for Democrats who were there in Washington who couldn't stop it from happening. And so regardless of who's in charge, it's a very thin margin. It's a very thin amount of power that each party has in Washington today. And the town halls are going to be spicier than ever before. And I think that that really makes it very difficult. And it's going to make it that much more discouraging for them to come back in August to get appropriations done and all the other work that has to happen before the end of the year.
So bring me inside this whole process here. You're a lawmaker. You head home. You're on the phone with your chief or whomever. Hey, we've got a schedule. You're talking to the home office. You're going to do 2 town halls. Do you have any control over who attends these? Because Republicans always tell us, well, it's Democratic activists showing up. They hated us to begin with, and they didn't like this bill. But who are the actual voters showing up at these events, and how authentic is their message?
Well, Joe, it depends on the district. Every district handles it differently. But the truth of it is that once you're elected, you are the elected for the entire district, regardless of what party affiliation you have. I mean, party affiliation is about getting elected. But once you're in place, you are supposed to govern for all in your district. And I suspect that the ones that show up at these town halls are the ones that are the most irritated and concerned about what the direction is that's happening not only in the district, but in Washington, D.C. And so, yes, of course, there's going to be back and forth about whether or not it's filled with Democrat operatives and Democrat mischief. But the truth of it is that regardless of your party, people are not pleased with the way things are going in Washington, D.C. They want to see action. They want people to stop talking about things that don't seem to affect their lives all that much. And I'm referring to that list of bad actors as we talk about that Epstein disgusting and deplorable activities on that side of the message meter. There's so much to talk about, and it makes it that much harder for the members who then have to stand before their constituents, Republicans, Democrats, or otherwise, and talk about what it is they're doing in Washington without getting sort of mired down in the political back and forth that happens inevitably every time we have a town hall.
Well, you went there, so let's talk about Jeffrey Epstein. I'm guessing that this is going to come up at all of these town hall meetings as well. And while we're talking about polling, we had new numbers from Ipsos yesterday that Cliff Young brought us here. Take a look at this. Approval of the handling of the Epstein files, the way the administration is handling them. GOP support is only at 35%. Democratic support, 4%. Everyone else is at 17%. The president couldn't get out of the White House this morning without being faced with at least a half dozen questions about Epstein. He didn't really answer any of them. All he did was talk about how Todd Blanche is a great lawyer and how what you really ought to be looking at is Bill Clinton and the Democrats who are on this supposed list. Lisa, what should lawmakers be saying about this?
I think lawmakers regardless of their party, ought to say that this is a disgusting and deplorable situation, what had happened under Jeffrey Epstein and his reign of terror and everything else and anyone else that was involved in it. But it deserves a full-throated investigation. It should not be treated as politics because there were real human beings involved and hurt in what happened here. And the president and everyone else that has anything to say about it ought to act swiftly and act responsibly to get to the bottom of the issues that are at hand here. Make sure that those that are guilty are called to action and that we can get back to the issues that the American people care about. Because, Joe, I think some people will ask questions about Jeffrey Epstein in the town halls. But more importantly, the American people want their real issues, their home inside the house budget issues addressed so that they can get back to feeling like the American government is doing what it's supposed to do to serve them well. And that's the big distraction. That's the one thing that I think is the greatest disadvantage to what's happening today, is that we're distracted by a horrible thing that happened. I think everyone agrees that Jeffrey Epstein and the reign of hideous things that happened with him and all the people involved ought to be addressed. But we can walk and chew gum
down
in
the floor
Washington,
this
D.C.
week.
Yeah, it sure did.
I don't know what you thought about this. I don't know if other speakers would have acted the same way, but there are great worries that this is actually going to keep us from getting a budget together with the limited time that they'll have when they get back between, Labor Day and the end of September. We're going to be dealing with this. And as lawmakers get home, it's not just voters who will be bringing it up, Lisa. The DNC, as I'm sure you saw, is making ads to run the rest of the summer about Jeffrey Epstein in a dozen Republican-held House districts. It's going to coincide with the recess, according to Axios, and will run. These videos are online. They'll run right before you see something on a right-wing YouTube channel. They're also going to be on some Fox videos as well. I don't know if these are necessary, though, because people, from what we're hearing, are calling Republican lawmakers' offices all day long demanding the release of these documents. What do the ads do?
I think there's a real risk in those ads, Joe. I really hope that the Democrats are thoughtful enough, as someone who's an operative, who sees all the contours of these kinds of issues. I really do hope that they're mindful that there is a danger in overstepping and a danger in pushing this too much to be too political, because it very well could backsplash on them in a way that's not helpful. Yes, people want to know more. They want answers to this Jeffrey Epstein issue. And in general, they'd like to see the list. What they really want is they want a scalp. And I think Democrats think that there's an opportunity here to inflict harm on the president. And I think that Republicans see this as a distraction from Republicans in Congress, specifically the speaker himself, saw this as something that was standing in the way of progress. So set aside politics. It was definitely holding the Congress away from the possibility of advancing legislation and getting work done. It's another distraction and another political football. It ought not to be a political football. It ought to be addressed, and questions ought to be answered. But the back and the forth, I think, is just another example of how the American people look at Washington and think we're not serious because we're letting all of these other things get in the way of them doing their job.
Can't argue with that. The president today, when asked about it, Lisa, said he has not considered granting a pardon to Ghislaine Maxwell. What would happen if he did?
Oh, I think people would probably assume that that's just another example of how the president is somehow entangled in all of this nonsense that's gone on. I mean, it seems to me the way his handling has been of this has been one that appears to be a guilty behavior. His behavior is concerning to people. And the fact that he continues to talk about it continues to make people wonder what role he has had in any of this. But more importantly, he's doing everything he can to distract from that by pointing at others that were involved, by pointing at other issues, by raising up other. There has been a huge amount of distraction in terms of the news every single day coming from the White House. But Joe, you and I both know that sooner or later, there's either going to be someone to answer for this, or it's going to be just another thing where either we overreact or we do nothing in Washington, D.C. And that's always the criticism of how we do work here in the Capitol.
Unbelievable. I feel like there'd be a riot in Lafayette Square if that pardon came along. Interesting, when he was asked about potentially pardoning P. Diddy, he said he might think about it. This one, not so much. Lisa, it's great to see you. We're overdue. Lisa Camuso-Miller, Friday Reporter podcast, former RNC communications director. Look for her on LinkedIn. She makes magic out of that platform. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.